I'm Dave Cross. This time around in my article in Shutter Magazine, I talk about the power of using brushes in Photoshop to create interesting creative effects. Now, whether you create your own brushes, as we talk about in the article, or whether you find brushes, there's many of them out there for some other source, the key is there are some really interesting ways you can use brushes beyond the obvious, such as creating a nice border effect, or painting on a mask, or creating a background, all kinds of things. And I wasn't exaggerating in the article when I said that I've really changed my approach now. As I walk around with my camera, I'm constantly saying, that could make a great background as a brush. So I'm looking for textures, I'm looking for cracks in cement, I'm looking for peeling paint, all kinds of things that I try. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does, and creates a really interesting effect. Now, in the article, I talk about a couple of techniques that, frankly, were hard to describe in words alone. So in this video, I'm going to go through kind of a step-by-step to talk about a way to take advantage of Camera Raw smart objects to help you define a brush. So let's take a look at that first. So here I've opened one of my smoke attempt photos in Camera Raw, and I have my Camera Raw workflow options to be open in Photoshop as a smart object, which creates this nice two-way street back and forth. So I want to try to make the background as black as possible and the smoke light. So it's a matter of kind of playing around with the settings. Now normally it would be a very bad thing to see this kind of clipping warning, but that's okay because I'm trying to get this kind of effect. I'm trying to get black as the background and white and gray for my smoke. So it's a matter of trying to find the right kind of happy medium, but the point is I'm not really sure. So I click Open Object. Now I can't just go to Adjustments and choose Invert because it's a Camera Raw smart object. So instead, I add an Invert Adjustment layer. And right away I can see, okay, that's really too light. I mean, I can barely see that at all. I want to see something more. So if I double click, go back here, now let's try getting a bit more white in here. Let's look at it a little closer. I'm feeling this is kind of noisy, so I'd also go back in and try to take out some of the noise if possible. Let's try that. That looks a little better. So now the idea of this is I can go back and forth and kind of play with it, and I'm constantly seeing what it's going to look like because of this invert shows me kind of what my brush is going to be like. So now I can make that into a brush, choose Define Brush Preset, recognizing this is going to be a pretty light brush because it's not really black. And I want to try it and see how well it works. So let's make ourselves a document and fill it with some color. Take our brush that we just created, and it's going to show us, by the way, the size of it. And now let's choose some color. Make it a little bigger and paint. You can see it's pretty subtle in this case. I'd have to build it up, but it's still along the lines of what I want. So by doing this technique, what this means is we can go back and forth between Camera Raw and Photoshop and kind of tweak the results. As long as you have that invert adjustment layer, you could even do things like, let's try adding a levels adjustment layer to try and make it a little darker, and now if we define that as a brush, we'd get a different result. So by combining Camera Raw Smart Object, we can go back and forth, and adjustment layers, just make sure you're always clicking on down at the bottom, and then you can define that as a new brush. Now the second key technique is an interesting way to create kind of a textured effect using a layer mask that involves using something many people don't use too much called the mixer brush. So let's see how that works. In this technique, I've already started by unlocking the background layer. I'm going to add a new layer below, Command and Control click, and I'm going to just fill that with some color. I can always change it later. Then on the top layer, I want to add a layer mask, but I want to hide everything. So if you Option or Alt click on the layer mask, everything will be hidden. So you can see I have a black layer mask, and my photo's still there, it's just completely hidden. Go to my brush tool, and I'm going to start off with one of the built-in brushes, this kind of chalk brush, just to get me started. And I've got the opacity probably at about 70% or so with white as my foreground color. I want to make the brush a little bigger though. And what I'm going to do is just basically paint a brush stroke, and then another one, and then another one. And you can see I'm kind of building up the paint, and I'm trying to just roughly show my subject so I can see her and some of the other elements like a bit of the chair. But I'm deliberately not trying to be incredibly accurate because that's kind of the effect. The only place I want to really make sure I've got it built up nicely is in her face and other areas like that. But otherwise, I've deliberately got some of this textured look going on a little bit like that. But then, and if we look at the layer mask, it looks like this, shades of white and gray. Then we're going to switch to this tool called the mixer brush tool. What the mixer brush does is it treats this paint as if it's wet. So if we Option or Alt click on the layer mask for a second, and for now I'm just going to go back to a regular brush so you can see what it does. That's a little big. So again, it's as if this is wet, so now as you see, as I pull or push, I'm going to say take this paint and pull the white paint into the black or the other way around. And you can see I'm pushing and pulling the paint around. Depending on the settings of the brush, you're going to get a different result. What I want to do though is try using one of these interesting brushes we created, like our smoke brush. Now with the mixer brush, I'm going to start to push and pull, but the difference is I'm pushing and pulling with an unusual brush, so it's a very subtle effect. Now you can't really see it right now. If I Option or Alt click again, you can start to see the effect. Now this brush is so see-through it's hard to see, so let me get a different brush that has just a bit more to it, so you'll see it a little more quickly. But all I'm doing is painting on here, just pushing and pulling the paint to try and get the effect. Of course, you can use different settings on the mixer brush, but you can see this is kind of the effect that you're getting. So as I'm pushing and pulling, that's what's happening with it. Which is kind of cool, I think. And then if we take it a step further, why not go onto the background and pick some contrasty color. I would probably actually do this on a separate layer. And go back to our regular brush tool with some of our interesting, there's a bunch of splash brushes that I picked up somewhere. I'll make this bigger and start to put some color in the background. Let's try a darker color too. As you can clearly tell, I don't have any specific goal in mind here. I'm just trying things. We can even change the blend mode to multiply. But as I said in the article, one of the things that's really neat about this is nothing here is permanent. In fact, I can still edit the camera raw settings. I can throw away this layer mask, or I could copy this layer mask into another document and reuse it there. So taking advantage of the unusual brushes we create, the mixer brush can offer some really interesting possibilities. Now, whether you create your own brushes or you download free brushes or purchase brushes that are out there and available, there's lots of different options, but the real important point I want to make is it really can open up some wonderful creative possibilities that can help you create artwork that sells. I'm Dave Cross. We'll see you next time.